as a relatively young democracy, one of the problems that we usually see is the lack of confidence in your country, in your institutions, with many arguments why people have not had such confidence. So this was really a game changer. And for the first time, we have had 80% of the people saying that they do believe that the government was handling the crisis appropriately. Of course, the crisis is far from over, and we will have to be more patient and smarter in the second half, probably.
Yes, I understand. Of course, for a country like North-Macedonia, it's a very difficult situation. Also, you're a tourist economy, and so I know a lot of Dutch people are also waiting to hear whether they are allowed again to visit your lovely Ohrid Lake. Is the country opening up already?
We are negotiating with some of the neighbors. We were planning on opening some of the borders at least mid-June, but we will see how this week proceeds. We have seen at the beginning, a huge increase in the concerns of the citizens. They were worried, but after a while, it became kind of even fashionable to believe that this is a crisis that has been blown out of proportions. And many people, until last week, believed that this is not really a serious crisis. And they have relaxed the normal precautionary measures that we have installed. And we see now the consequences for this. And this is why we are not rushing into any decisions on opening up the borders. We do hope that this year we will see some foreign tourists, but I have to be honest and say that our focus for this summer will probably be domestic tourists, which usually were interested in visiting other countries. But I think that because of the situation in transport and in tourism generally, I think that we will rediscover the beauties of North Macedonia again and again.
I hope so, but I totally agree with you that it's really important to be careful. And I think we will all experience that, countries that have been struck by this pandemic. I was wondering, I was mentioning you're the Minister of Defense, but you're currently in a caretaker government. How did that come? Can you explain a little bit?
Well, North Macedonia had to deal with different challenges in the last several years. And one of the important and very difficult ones was several years ago when we found ourselves in a situation where most of our democratic checks and balances stopped working. And let me say that your foundation was one of the first who actually opened up a discussion. I was present in The Hague as your guest to talk about how come then Macedonia, from one of the front runners in terms of EU membership, in terms of democratic development, became a victim of a so-called hybrid regime. We have seen decline in media freedom. We have seen decline in all democratic indicators. And we have found ourselves in a situation where any sort of opposition or political engagement was considered a risk for us, risk for our families, risk for our parties. And we have struggled a lot. We have been in opposition for 11 years, but out of these 11 years, the last 3 were practically a semi-war-like atmosphere in which the opposition was attacked systematically and media was completely occupied. And we have faced challenges. How do you fight this non-democratic governance? Do you go through the normal democratic channels, or you come up with something completely different? But we have been, I think, systematic, persistent, united, and creative. And we have managed to win elections even in situation where the level playing field was completely non-existent. So we were able to transform this country in practically less than 3 years. We are one of the few countries in Europe that has seen media freedom increase, all indicators. We have improved democratic ratings on all different assessments and indexes. And we have seen that our democracy can be vibrant again, which means that the government is criticized all the time for everything. But this is a signal of a vibrant and free society. And if I can, pin to one real undisputed success of our government, that is that we have become a normal democracy again and again. Yeah. So I do believe as a result of these negotiations in the past, we went for elections in 2016 with a so-called technical caretaker government. And this was because the rules of the game were not respected. And this was the agreement between the then government and the opposition. This was a decision to have this kind of a government only during these elections, never again. We have shown as a government that we have the democratic capacity and the political will to organize free and fair elections. All the elections after 2016 were seen as an improvement by OSCE and ODIHR, and also by our local monitors. Nevertheless, when the opposition, the old undemocratic autocratic government, came and said, we want the same kind of caretaker government, again, we did not have the obligation to do it. It was a one-time compromise and consensus, but we said, we are not only Democrats, we want to show to our people and to the rest of the world that we will win, regardless of who is organizing the elections. We never thought that this caretaker government will go through the Corona crisis and will last much longer than the 3 months. Yeah. I do believe that now this arrangement is taking its toll, because we have seen some difficulties within the government, because we have the Minister of Interior or the Minister of Police, who is a member of the former government. But this is the price that you pay for democracy. You know, sometimes freedom is an endless meeting, as they say. And sometimes we are less efficient than we should have been. But this was a deliberate choice that we have made for the good of the country.
Because the elections now they were actually scheduled for the end of the year. Then they were the beginning of this year, but now you're not certain yet when to organize them.
Our regular elections were supposed to take place this December. Yeah. And then last year, we were approaching our NATO membership. We have made historic breakthroughs with Bulgaria and with Greece on the name issue. And, you know, the planned follow-up was that the European Union will actually come forward and deliver a decision on starting accession talks with us, because it was always one of the blocking issues that prevented us from starting accession talks. And unfortunately, because of the other points of view by some member states, last October, the decision was not made. No. And as a result of this, we believed as a government that we need to, you know, practically return the legitimacy back to the people and ask for them to decide. It's in a very strange twist of events. We have scheduled the elections for the 12th of April. In the meantime, we became both a NATO member state, and the EU finally made the decision. So the reason for having early elections was non-existent, but the elections were already scheduled. The technical caretaker government was already elected, and we were moving towards elections. I think that we felt very safe that we are winning the elections. We have brought to the country not only 2 strategic successes, EU and NATO, but in the same time, we have shown that you can do this by implementing a very strong social democratic progressive agenda. Minimum wage has increased by almost 60%. Average wage was increasing. Pensions went up. Social benefits were tripled in certain families. And in the same time, 60,000 new jobs were produced by the economy. So we proved that you don't have to choose between economic development and progressive policies. You can do both. Yeah. So we had a very, very strong ticket for the elections. Elections had to be postponed. We are currently still having a state of emergency, partially because of the virus, but also because we don't have a functioning parliament. And the opposition rejected the initiative that we had 2 months ago to reinstate the parliament so that we can have a democratic control over the government. So if things go according to the plan, in the course of next 10 days, the state of emergency will expire. And then the election, pre-election procedures will continue, and we will have elections on the 5th of July. So this is the plan. We believe that this is a period too long for any democracy to have a state of emergency, extra powers to the government, and no control extra powers by the government and no control by the parliament. So we need a functioning parliament as soon as possible.
Yes, yeah, we could never expect, of course, to end up in this situation. And I think it was indeed, from my perspective, finally the decision was made by the EU to start a negotiation. Because actually, when I look at your career, the EU and EU becoming an EU member, that was always more or less the center point of your career. Because when you were in 2005 in government for the first time, that's when the first decision was made for you to become an EU country and to start negotiations. And due to all what happened, the specific situation you were in with the name question, that took so much time. But for you, EU has always been center point, right?
I have this story that I would have never ended up in politics if it was not the exposure to some of the progressive parties and the youth organizations in the 90s. I'm an engineer by profession, an electrical engineer. Whenever they would have asked me, am I interested in politics as a profession, I was always saying no, because this was never the plan. And then in my discussions with some of the European UC sister parties, sister organizations, and in my stay in Norway, I always refer to Utøya as a place that have built, at that time with me, a huge sense of hope that politics can be a noble profession, and that it can really, that with your engagement, you can really help the change that you want to see in your country. So I sometimes say to my Norwegian colleagues, when I'm up, I say, I have to give you a credit for my career. When I'm down, I tell them you are to blame for my presence in politics. But I still have this sense, because of this EU important project for Macedonia, that this is the transformation that we like to see. And based on my experience, it is possible. In 2002, when we were elected, this was a country torn by conflict and almost war. In 3 years, we became an EU candidate country. So practically, we were going in parallel with Croatia. And then the conservatives and the nationalists took over. We lost our pace, we lost our way. It was not just the name issue. It was always this crisis of democratic institutions that actually made us pause, and this pause lasted for 11 years. So, but our example shows that this was not a one-time incident. For second time, the Social Democrats are showing that when we are in charge of making these decisions, we steer the course towards calmer, predictable, democratic, and more progressive waters. So I have extreme pride that I was able to participate in the two crucial processes for my country: NATO membership and the EU accession.
Yes, and I think you have all the right to be proud. And I think especially also your personal engagement. And when we were preparing for this interview, and when I think about you, Radmila, I also always have to think about these images of from 3 years ago, when the parliament was raided by thugs, and you were pulled by your hair through the parliament. And if I then think about all the achievements that you made in the last 3 years as a party, also with Saev, your party leader, I think it's amazing how also the atmosphere in the country changed. So I think you really deserve yes, a lot of congratulations for that effort. But probably there are still a lot of challenges now on the road to really becoming an EU member. And maybe you can just mention the two most important challenges for your country.
I will actually mention three, because I do believe that on certain issues, the problems feed each other. And what we have seen, for example, is that an issue which was never seen as a problem in the country, vibrant democracy, was really we thought it's part of our DNA as a country. We had our ups and downs in terms of the quality of the institutions, the economy, but I knew that going into politics could mean that your name or yourself are dragged in the dirt, but nobody in this country ever thought that being in parliament could be a risky place. That was completely out of the question. So, and then we learned the hard way that some things are never for granted, including democracy, including minority rights, including rights for political participation. And I have to say that sometimes I tend to forget about these events in parliament. We should not, but sometimes it is easier to let it go. But from time to time, I try to remind myself so that we appreciate progress more. It was not just the dragging and the aggression. As I say, I had to put 4 stitches in my head to pay for the transition in governance. That was unheard of in this country. And this is why I attach huge importance to especially freedom of media. I do believe that we have underestimated the importance of media in the region. And sometimes I believe that this is happening even in some European Union countries. Without free media, none of us is free. Without free media, none of the political parties can think running in normal circumstances. But when I think about the future challenges, I do believe that North Macedonia needs to focus still on an even more progressive economic of young, well-educated part of the public who is able to accept, the new type of technology, the new type of economy, and then also one part of the country which is lagging behind, both in terms of education, in terms of access to services, in terms of being able to compete in this economy. So I do believe that as social democrats, we really need to make sure that our social safety network and our education system create basic level playing field. And this is a big issue for our next mandate, especially in view to COVID, post-COVID consequences. We have seen many companies who have opposed our proposal for progressive taxation last year, who now came knocking on our doors as a government for rescue packages. Now the state and the government are important. The budget has to be big. But last year, the discussion was completely different. So I think that this situation will put things slightly in a different perspective. The second challenge that we face is environment. And this is a country that has excellent conditions for healthy food, solar energy, but we are still struggling with some of the pollution, especially in the big cities. And I do believe that we will have to combine both crises. And the third issue that we have to keep looking at is, of course, that we are extremely diverse country. And it used to be as a key weakness for the country. Through the crisis, the political crisis a few years ago, and even during this COVID crisis, we're trying to show can be an advantage. And but these issues do not get solved. You have to solve them on a daily basis. Even now, when we were faced with COVID, issues of religious diversity emerged. We had Christian holidays, then we had Muslim holidays. How you deal with some of the restrictive measures during these holidays becomes a political issue per se.
Yeah.
And this is why I believe with right education and with politicians not trying to play the fear card, I think this country can be a very safe, very diverse, and very creative place. So I do believe that these are the three issues that we need to focus in the future as well.
Well, actually, I think this message goes for the whole of the EU, the whole of Europe, actually, because it's also in the heart of what kind of difficulties we all face at the moment. So I think you're absolutely right there. I would also like to discuss a little bit NATO, because, well, you will go into history as the Ministry of Defense that brought your country to NATO. And there was a question from one of our viewers, Mr. Steven Wijmalen, who asked you what changed actually for you. Did your strategy change after you became NATO member?
I have to say that we started with a very ambitious plan. So in 2017, 1st of June, we were elected. There was a general delay in all our plans, strategic defense plans. The army was marginalized, the money was missing, the situation was deplorable. And partly because the hope, the aspiration of the last 3 decades of becoming a NATO member state was lost. So when the former government lost that hope, they stopped even investing at all in the sector. So when we started developing a new strategy, some of the defense reviews, we said, okay, let's define our goal. And our goal was membership, not later, sooner. And this is why practically the new plans that we have built were based on the premise that we are becoming a NATO member state in the course of the next 2 years. And I remember initially there was a lot of skepticism, both in the country and in certain NATO quarters as well. And people were very helpful, they were very supportive, but they said, you know, this sentence, please manage your expectations. And I had a very strong déjà vu feeling, because this was exactly the message that we got from the EU back in 2003 when we applied for EU membership. My response to NATO officials was the same like my response to EU officials many years ago. I said, this is a small country, and trust me that we know our mentality. If we put our bar really low, we will not manage. But if we put our bar a bit higher, we will surprise both you and ourselves. And this is what happened. Many people who were very skeptical at first said, wow, you did it in 2 years. It was not present. NATO was not in the best moments. Many people were worried that there won't be a consensus about a new member in a time when many questions were initiated by already present member states. But I think that both our record in terms of reforming the army, but also our record on reforming the intelligence sector, media, the political sector, and the name issue and the agreement with Bulgaria, practically we had a perfect case. And it was difficult to say no, although probably it was not the easiest solution in times of crisis. I remember going to the NATO summit in Brussels a year and a half ago and not having the best atmosphere for a consensus. Okay. But even under these difficult circumstances, we have been successful, and Spain was the last to ratify the NATO accession treaty under dramatic circumstances for Spain. And but I think that this was the NATO solidarity at its best, and let me thank all of the countries for doing really the ratification procedure in a very, very efficient process. It brought a lot of pride and sense of accomplishment to our people, and sometimes it is emotions that matter as well. It is not just, you know, what is on paper.
You're the 30th member now, so that's great. I have another question from one of our viewers. It's a question from Jan Beugelaar, who said that your constitutional court annulled the anti-discrimination law, which assured the rights for the LGBTI community. That was, I guess, also due to the fact that you are in a caretaker government and the parliament was not able to convene with the right numbers. What will you do to restore this?
Let me be very direct. The Constitutional Court has annulled the law, so practically we do not have any anti-discrimination law in this moment, which is really a horrible situation. And the thing that we have just added in our party manifesto, because we needed to update it compared to the manifesto we had for the elections in April, the same anti-discrimination law will be the first law that our new government after the elections will present to Parliament. And I have no doubts that our parliamentary majority will endorse it. But I think this is an interesting question to show, again, that some of these achievements are not granted and they're not for good. I remember when we were adopting the anti-discrimination law, this was not an easy process. We have been severely attacked by the conservatives and by the opposition who have never accepted this law in the last 10 years. And they have opposed it. We had the majority, we adopted the law. And then the former president of the country, who came from the Conservative Party, he didn't want to sign the law. So it was sent back to Parliament. And this is why the Constitutional Court has annulled it, because in their view, this law had to be adopted with an absolute majority, which we did not have in that time. So I think they have used a rather technical argument, but I think that the technical government should not overshadow the fact that we do have strong political opposition. So who wins the elections will matter, not only for the economic, the social, the other, but also for these kinds of issues of diversity and human rights. And I do hope that everyone in North Macedonia who is in favor of this becoming a much more open and tolerant democracy with visible and clear rights for the LGBT community will support a government that has been very strong and very clear on this. This is why the first Pride was organized in Skopje some time ago, because our government was always open and supportive.
Good, thank you. And of course, we wish you all the best with the upcoming elections. So we are, unfortunately, Radmila, we are out of time. I think it was a great conversation with you, and I have many more questions. But I would just like to ask one final question. This whole COVID-19 crisis has been discussed a lot, and of course, there's a lot of problems attached to it, but people are also saying, well, let's hope something good will come out of it. Do you have any idea, any positive turn to this? Do you think, what kind of lessons have we learned, and can we adopt in the time to come?
From time to time, I tend to become a bit cynical. So I wonder whether we will learn the lesson. But I'm an optimist as a character, and I think that when you're a politician in the Balkans, it comes in the job description. If you're not optimistic, you have retired. So I wonder whether, I'm definitely certain that we have seen the lessons. And I do hope that we will remind ourselves of these lessons when the crisis disappears. And I think that the first lesson that became very visible is that we are really in the same boat. And this refers not only to the health sector, but very much to how we approach the questions of, are you alone for yourself? Should everyone be left based on his or her abilities? Or should we try to... this crisis has given more arguments that politics should be progressive. And you know, I had a conversation with young people a few days ago with Friedrich Ebert and the Progress Institute in North Macedonia. And I said, it's strange to quote an American president, but I think that's the best quote about progressive politics. I think it was Theodore Roosevelt who said that a great democracy has to be progressive, or it will cease to be great or democracy. And we have really seen these tendencies in many great and not so great democracies. So I do believe that like the crisis of 2008, this crisis has shown that our policies are right. Now we progressives have to show that we are strong enough to maintain that image, to maintain that feeling, and to be able to continue with our values even after the crisis was gone. I don't think that we have succeeded in this after 2008, but I do hope that the companies, the citizens, the institutions, the healthcare will get it right this time.
No, I certainly hope so. And but there's still a lot of work to be done. Radmila, thank you very much for this extremely interesting and inspiring conversation. I wish you personally all the luck in the world with your job as minister and with the job that you will do after the elections. Of course, I wish you all the party. I wish you the best result in the elections. And again, thank you very much for being with us with What's Next. And goodbye, and say hello to all the friends in North Macedonia. Thank you.
Stay safe, and regards to everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.